Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone all over the world. Thank you so much for joining for this free training, how to create a successful virtual event. We'll be here for about an hour. Maybe we'll go a little bit over if there's extra questions. But for those of you that need to leave, we'll definitely be finished with all the content within 1 hour. As I said, my name is James Ellsmore, currently calling you from Medellin in Colombia under a very strict lockdown. And I just want to share with you some of the experiences that our company, Allen Innovation, has had with hosting events and some lessons that hopefully will be useful for you in adapting to this new world we're in. I think the principles around virtual events are obviously very relevant today with the current global crisis and the transition towards using more virtual technology. But we've been using these for years, and our team is actually spread out all over the world. We have team members in 6 countries. And so for us, we're very used to doing these virtual events. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our experiences and give you some tips for running your own virtual events. So for those of you that haven't yet, if you want to type into the chat just your name, where you're coming from, and your company or organization, if relevant, and we'll do a quick poll just to see who is joining us today. Obviously, we'll be doing another session this evening, so our friends in Australia and Asia are probably asleep right now. But I can see a lot of people in Europe, North America, and the Caribbean joining. Wow, looking at all these hellos coming through. Just wanted to say, if you're, I can see a lot more messages. If you make sure you click that blue box that says all panelists and click all panelists and attendees. So everyone who's here can see all your messages, because I'm going to be a little bit busy talking through, so I'm not necessarily going to see your messages. But the great benefit about a webinar like this is the ability to communicate with everyone else who is on this chat. Fantastic. Good to see some familiar faces and some new people joining, really from all over the world, from Trinidad, from the Netherlands, from the UK, lots from the UK, from Chicago. Hope it's not too cold there. From Sweden, from France, from Saudi Arabia, Nova Scotia, Lisbon. Wonderful. As you can see, actually 60% of you are from Europe, which is unusual. I think last week we had more from the Americas joining, but maybe they'll be joining our evening session later today. Okay, so we'll get started. So if you want to create a virtual event, or you're just interested in learning some more about the technology and opportunities that are out there, you're in the right place. I'll be running through some basic tips, and these are relevant really whether you're in a nonprofit, private sector, government, or academia. The tips should be applicable across, and also depending on the type of event, whether you're just thinking of a single webinar or online training session or a full 3, 4, 5 day conference, the basics are the same, and we'll help you scale up. So I'll run through those, and at the end I'll tell you a little bit about the online course that we're launching, which some of you might be interested in. As we're going along, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A. As you can see, the chat's very busy, and I'm not going to have that open while I'm talking because I'm not that good at multitasking. So feel free to talk to each other in the chat, but if you have any questions that we'll answer at the end of the talk, make sure you select the Q&A option, which is different to the chat, and we'll come through to those at the end and answer as many as possible. So there's 3 things that I'll be covering today. This is based on all the questions that I've received after we ran an event last year, a virtual event. We've had a lot of inquiries over the last few weeks of people asking these questions. So the first is the best software platform for you to use. And it's key here, actually, it's more than one software platform. It's not just the videos, it's thinking about how you're hosting the entirety of the event. So for most people, that's several software platforms. The second is, how do you create a networking experience? A lot of people think that for networking, you need face-to-face. And what I like to say is for virtual events, it's different. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just a different experience. And there's a lot of pros actually to doing networking online and making it more efficient. So I think there's a lot of value in virtual events in that sense. And then finally, how to make sure a speaker and audiences are engaged. Obviously, there's a difference when you have a captive audience in a room compared to people who are at home, who have the dog, the kids, whatever else is happening in the background distracting. So you want to really make sure people are engaged, they show up, and they are participating. So those are the three main things we'll cover. And then if you have questions outside that, we'll do my best to answer those. So quickly about me, my name is James Ellsmore. I'm from the UK. As I said, currently in Colombia. I'm the director of Island Innovation. I've done various speaking events around the world and formerly wrote for Forbes magazine, also continue to write for various different outlets. My whole career has been virtual, ranging from my master's degree, which I did for a pioneering distance learning institution, entirely online, the University of the Highlands and Islands, that was set up actually to provide education to the rural northern half of Scotland, which previously didn't have it. I happened to be in the Caribbean at the time while I was studying, but the principles are the same. And I think that as we're seeing now with this sudden push to take on distance education, that's going to become more and more common and provides huge opportunities for people. So I was very privileged to have that experience. But I run a team that's spread over 4 continents, 6 countries. We have Island Innovation. We have staff in Ghana, in the UK, in the US, Venezuela, and me in Colombia, and also in Jamaica. So we have a really diverse team of people who are all used to working online. I am a consultant for companies looking to go virtual events or to do virtual events, or other communications projects, particularly in the sustainable development sector, but across other sectors also. And last year we founded, through Island Innovation, the Virtual Island Summit, which had over 4,000 participants, 100 speakers, and 27 sessions. So it was a bit of a mammoth undertaking. And we'll be holding that event again this year in September, hoping to reach 10,000 participants. For us, the motivation of holding the Virtual Island Summit was obviously before the COVID-19 pandemic happened, but we saw the value in having a global summit where people from all over the world could contribute, could participate, and could really, sorry, one second, something popped up on my screen, where people from all over the world could participate. And the value is that you make the conference much more open to different people, and particularly for our audience on islands, where often it's quite expensive or difficult to travel from them compared to other areas. Having a virtual event really allowed us to reach more people. And so having a panel on a topic like, let's say, electric vehicles, and having participants from Barbados, Iceland, Malta, and Fiji just created an amazing dynamic that would be really difficult to recreate in a physical conference. So that's why I think that actually virtual conferences in many ways can do things that physical conferences would struggle to do if you don't have tens of millions of dollars of a budget to fly people in. And then of course there's the climate change argument, reducing emissions, that virtual conferences do far better at. So as I said, today's workshop will be interactive. Please stay until the end so we go through the Q&A. Feel free to ask questions. That says in the chat, actually, I mean ask questions in the Q&A, but feel free to talk to each other and communicate in the chat, share information about your events. And as I said, please make sure you select all panelists and attendees. Lars, Kata, Armand, Carly, I see lots of people messaging, but if you want to resend your messages to everyone, it's great for those to know who else is participating. Okay, so tip number 1, this is the question I'm getting all the time. What is the best software for my virtual event? And there are tons of software out there. I mean, recently Zoom has become a household name in the way that Google and Microsoft and Apple were. So Zoom has been propelled into being one of the most foremost platforms, and that's what we're using today. But there are tons of other platforms out there that fulfill different roles, and they all have their pros and cons. I like Zoom for many reasons, but it's definitely not perfect. And there are other platforms that might suit other people for different reasons. The key is that most people think you only need the one software platform. The first thing you think of is what's hosting your videos. And obviously that's very important. That's what's hosting us right now, and we're able to talk through. But you need to think about all the other things that hosting a conference requires, from registrations to interaction with social media, sending emails, the website platform. There's multiple different areas. So all of these different software platforms need to interact for a complex event. Maybe a single webinar you can get by with using one platform, but for a serious event, you need to think of multiple platforms to be involved. So the streaming software, as I mentioned, we're using Zoom, the email notifications, engagement tool for your live attendees, and then recreating that networking experience, linking with social media, and then creating websites for registrations as well. And those are kind of the key ones, but depending on how deep you want to go, depending on whether you're running a single webinar or a workshop or more like a panel talk, there are different platforms that suit different needs. And even within Zoom, as an example, there are multiple options that you and different settings that you can use to tailor to your need. The best platform really depends on the event that you are trying to host. No one event is alike. So with clients that I've worked with for choosing their event, we tend to go for a whole strategic planning process, thinking about for each of these different elements that you need to include, and then evaluating when taking the budget into account, which platforms work the best. There are some free platforms out there are some very cheap platforms out there, but platforms can also cost tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's important to make sure you're choosing the right one to reflect the needs of your audience. So yeah, if you're doing a live webinar, these are the different types of events that you might be considering, and it's important again when you're thinking of doing something online, which of these ones suits the need. Live webinars like this one are great because you have that interaction of people talking in the chat, you have the live Q&A, we have the polls that we already tried. Pre-recorded talks might also make sense as well, depends on what you're doing. That avoids all of the risk of internet and electricity going out and all these other potential things coming up. But then the disadvantage is you might lose some of that interactivity. You can even have hybrid models where you have a pre-recorded talk, but the speaker is there answering questions in the chat or jumps in live at the end just to do the Q&A. And then pre-recorded talks might also make sense if you have a really preeminent speaker that is difficult to pin down, but is willing to pre-record a talk for you to use. Video conferencing solutions, things like Google Hangouts, Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, they're really good for internal meetings or even workshops of I guess less than 50 people, maybe 10 to 20 people. But for a webinar like this that's reaching a wider audience, they're not necessarily the most applicable. And then you have social media streaming, panels, breakout rooms. All of these functions can fulfill different things. So breakout rooms is something that I'm getting a lot of questions about. That's not something we could do inside this webinar, for example, but using a different setting within Zoom. If we had a meeting of, say, 50 people, we could break that out into 5 groups of 10 different people to discuss different topics, as you might in a physical meeting, and then bring everyone back together to then share their experiences. And that can work really well for those kind of small or medium-sized groups, or maybe for, let's say, a board meeting or something where you're trying to get an end product come out of that. Wow, I can see 200 people have joined us. That's fantastic. We actually have a few overflows from this time last week. We reached capacity at 500 people last week. And so I know a few of you are joining in because we had such high demand. I really, really appreciate those of you for your patience being here. Great. I can see some questions coming in the chat, but if you have any more questions, then please drop them in the Q&A and we'll go through them all at the end. Okay, so just curious for those of you who are attending to know a little bit about the type of events that you're considering. So you should see a poll pop up. If you're not actually planning an event right now, don't worry, but just from those types that I've mentioned, curious what you're thinking that makes the most sense. So just to explain social media streaming, we're not doing this right now, but for example, we could stream this webinar that we're hosting now directly onto YouTube or Facebook. LinkedIn also has a function, but that's a bit different. And that has its own value. It can reach a broader audience, and it has the organic reach of, say, Facebook or YouTube. But perhaps you don't get the same interaction that you do with Zoom, and it's more difficult to hold polls and things like that. But for really large events, those might make sense as well. I'll just share those results with you. So actually, the highest number are panels and breakout rooms, 42% of you. That's really interesting. Breakout rooms, as I say, tend to be more of a meeting and interactive discussion. I guess we could even separate panels and breakout rooms because they are slightly different things. Panels are what we used mostly at the Virtual Island Summit last year, where we had a chair and then 3 or 4 speakers, each putting in their topic. And that's similar to a panel session in a physical event as well. And that has some really great platform for discussion and to bring in speakers to talk to each other that might be difficult to get together in a physical room. And I think that's really where virtual events can excel, is bringing together knowledge and discussion of people that might be on different continents, and you'd either need a big budget or just be able to have a lot of time to be able to get those people together. If you're interested, check out the Virtual Island Summit website. You can see a bit more information about how we ran that event as well. I'll share it with you in the chat. Okay, so as I said, we had 4,000 speakers. You can see speakers from all over the world just in these, 4,000 attendees. That 4,000 speakers would have been a bit overwhelming. You can see the different people here in the chat. You can see here some people were able to do slideshow presentations. Others just kind of spoke from the heart and did whole keynote speeches. We did more like a fireside chat. So we were able to do all different types of things. And what I really liked about the Virtual Island Summit was how we were able to create a platform for networking and interaction. So people from places as diverse as the Pacific Islands, the Caribbean, the North Atlantic Islands were able to share their own case studies, experiences, projects, and get feedback and learn how other people on the other side of the world might be approaching similar challenges. And I think obviously with this, we're talking about very, very diverse places, but also the same thing if your conference is more geographically concentrated. There is still value because not only are you reaching people who are further away, but there's also people who, for example, a single parent who might struggle to be able to take 2 days off to go travel to another part of the country can more easily participate. People with disabilities who might otherwise not be able to participate. So there are ways of doing virtual events that actually make them a lot more inclusive and broad-reaching than you might be able to with a physical event. The tools that I used for this online event, so we had the video software, the Zoom platform like we're using now. We sent out email notifications and did registrations through MailChimp. We used Attendify, which is a networking platform that kind of creates a similar, like almost a mini Facebook or LinkedIn site just for your conference attendees. Attendify was the one that we used. We live streamed all of our webinars directly on Facebook, which helped us reach an extra audience. And then we hosted the website registration form that connected with MailChimp on a WordPress website, virtualislandsummit.com. And we're changing some of our tools this year. We've adapted, but also the innovation of tools is just happening so quickly. I mean, even in the last few weeks, a lot of the providers of tools that have traditionally focused on physical events are obviously panicking and scrambling to adapt their tools to be used for virtual events. And so the technology is evolving so quickly. It's really exciting. So I think actually virtual events in 1 year's time will have a lot of technology that even last year was not available to us to make things run more smoothly. And I'm in contact with a lot of people at these companies who have different platforms, keeping updated on how things work, but there's an almost infinite list of different platforms. So I'm sure you know others that I don't know. Would be interesting if you drop that in the chat. Other platforms that you like to use. If there's any tools that I didn't mention that you particularly like, or you have some other thoughts. Just curious to see what other people have used. Come on, drop that in the chat. I'm not seeing anything yet. Carly, oh, so you can't see all of these messages because people are sending to all panelist attendees. Carly from the American Solar Association says GoToWebinar. That's a competitor to Zoom. It doesn't have all of the features of Zoom, for example, but I think one of the benefits of GoToWebinar, correct me if I'm wrong, is it works in a browser. You don't necessarily need to download the software, so it can be more easily accessible. It's definitely a good alternative, and one that we considered too. See a couple of people saying GoToWebinar, Mentimeter, and Kahoot. I'm not used to Mentimeter. I've not heard of that one actually. Cisco WebEx, again, similar to GoToWebinar and Zoom. Microsoft Teams is better for individual or kind of group meetings internally, or kind of, I would say, less than maybe 20 to 40 people, something like that. Google Forms for registration, Amber says that's a really good one. Harry says heysummits.com. I see WebEx, Facebook Live, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Oh, lots of answers coming through now. Slack, oh, Ruth said Slack. That's a really good one, actually. We use that internally for Island Innovation and our partners to communicate with each other. And those informal conversations that happen through Slack are really helpful. And actually some conferences like to use Slack as a platform to involve all of their participants as well. Just a reminder, when you're sending messages, please select all panelists and attendees. One disadvantage of Zoom is that default feature that when you send a message, it automatically sends it just to the panelists, which is just me. So if you send it to all panelists and attendees, that means that everyone can benefit. Oh, Carly says actually for the WebEx, you do need to download it, and for GoToWebinar, you do need to download it. But there are some platforms that also allow you to Zoom, I shouldn't use that word, to talk and have a video chat directly in your browser, which doesn't need software. And so that can also be beneficial because downloading a software can be a barrier. One advantage now of Zoom, it's unfortunate, but kind of like Google for a search engine, or Gmail for your emails, and although a little bit less now, but at one point Skype for video conversations, Zoom is kind of becoming the go-to platform that is easy to use because everyone is using it. It's not a good reason only to use it, but it means that a lot of people already have that software downloaded now, particularly in the last few weeks. Actually, if you check out Zoom's share prices over the last few weeks, they're doing pretty well. I heard Corona beers are struggling with their share prices, but Zoom is doing very well, and they've been struggling to keep up with demand. So when something becomes that ubiquitous, it can just be helpful because people are already experienced with it. But again, so just quickly, Event Pilot, okay, there's so many more. I just encourage you to have a quick look through that chat and see some of the options, but this is the point, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to see so many different tools available, and research them to figure out which one makes sense. There's also big differences in prices for some of these tools as well. And I will say that a higher price does not necessarily mean a better tool. There are some really good tools that are much cheaper, and some pretty bad tools that charge a lot of money for them. So, okay, that was a lot, but I wanted to make sure we covered all of those questions on software platforms, because clearly that's one of the biggest issues when you're hosting an event. And if you have any more questions on that, we'll try and explore that at the end as well. Also in the course that we're launching, we go into a lot of detail about the different options available and how to be involved with that. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the course in a little while, but we will definitely explore the different platforms available. So tip number 2, how do you recreate the online networking experience? That is a really key issue, because to be honest, a lot of people go to conferences to meet people and to network, not necessarily for the content. I know people who've gone to conferences that are 3 days long and have not entered the exhibition hall at all because they've been outside talking with people, particularly in the private sector conferences. Maybe that's a bit different in academia and other sectors, but clearly the networking piece, regardless of your sector, is a key piece. So you want to be able to recreate that experience and help your guests interact with each other and with the speakers. most people think you need to be face-to-face to build those meaningful relationships. That's not true. You can actually, I think, in some ways create a better networking experience online. I've had people that I've worked with for years and I've not yet met in person because they're the other side of the world. And you can still have good relationships with them and be able to work with people. And that's going to obviously become more and more common, particularly this year as people are restricted from traveling. So there's a bit of a skill in itself with virtual networking. As I say, yeah, I think you can actually create a better networking experience online, and it can actually be more efficient. Okay, you're probably wondering why I have this map up here. If anyone knows where that dot is pointing at, drop it in the chat. I'm curious. I saw Laurie in here. You'll probably know where that is, Laurie. But if anyone else can guess, I'll explain why I have that map up in a second. But 3 benefits of the virtual networking experience. Allowing people to more easily identify and approach each other. You don't have the thing at a virtual, at an in-person conference where you are kind of just talking to people randomly at the coffee stand and hoping they're relevant and just bumping into people until you find someone who's actually working on something relevant to you. So using the online platform, you can clearly say what you're interested in, who you're interested in talking to, and kind of what you're offering or what you're looking for. You can expose people to a much more diverse group of people that perhaps if you had a physical event, it would not be possible to have those people involved. So like I said, with the Virtual Island Summit, which kind of alludes to the map here, we were able to bring people in who would not have been able to attend if we'd have done that in a physical event. So, and as I say before, that also includes other things beyond just the geography. People who might not have the budget to travel, but are still doing very important work. We had grassroots groups that are very focused on localized projects that had a lot to benefit from taking part, and also a lot to give in terms of their own experiences. But there was no way that they would have the budget to come to an expensive conference, especially if they had to travel. Also people who might need visas from other parts of the world. I think there's a lot to be gained from people in developing countries contributing to these conversations, and they would struggle sometimes with the visas to travel to other countries. And so making it easier and cheaper for them to be involved, I think has a lot of benefits. And then creating a more targeted and efficient networking experience. So being able to easily identify who you're talking to and more easily find those people, that's often challenging at a physical event. So at the Virtual Island Summit, I actually didn't see the right answer in the chat, I don't think. St. Helena is a good guess. A couple of people said, nearly there. Oh, Judith and Jeremy got it right, said Tristan da Cunha. So the reason I have a map of Tristan da Cunha, this island in the South Atlantic, that has a population of 500 people. The only way to get there is a 7 to 10 day sail from Cape Town. There's 4 to 6 boats a year, I think, and no airport. So we had a speaker, we had the head of their tourism department speak for us. Would we have been able to bring them to come to a physical conference in Europe or North America, or even Cape Town? No, it would have been really difficult. And so they were actually able, they don't have a good internet connection, but one of the features that Zoom has is you can actually call in over the phone. And I was able to share their presentation with photos while they spoke over the phone. And so that's probably a particularly extreme example, but bringing in people who have a lot to share, really interesting information, but otherwise would not be able to physically present, has a huge value. And another reason I like Zoom, I know this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but for people who might be working with participants who maybe have weak internet connections or something, that the ability to call over the phone, I think is a really valuable thing. And that's both for listeners, for meetings, but also for presenters as well. And clearly for if you're working with people in these very isolated places, then that's a big benefit there. So that was explaining the map anyway, my little story. But these opportunities for international collaborations is huge. I mean, already today before this call, I was on the phone with a group in Johannesburg. Yesterday, I was talking with people in Denmark, in Fiji, in Peru. And so working with people and sharing information from a really diverse set of countries, I think provides us so many opportunities with virtual summits. as I said before, this technology is really, really evolving very quickly and is being innovated on very quickly. So we used last year the Attendify platform as a way to help people network. That was one of the cheaper platforms. You can spend anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 plus on creating a networking platform. Just depends again how deep and how many features you want to go in. But the innovations that I'm seeing this year are actually that within the app you can do direct one-to-one calls. So you can actually do a FaceTime or a video call with other people attending the conference, which is a fairly new feature. At least making it that simple without having to share the number and then do it. Just having everything within one app to be able to share something makes things a lot easier. And then host things like speed networking, breakout sessions, small group calls. So I'll go through the different apps available here for networking experience in a minute. But I think the variety of tools available, I mean, it's really worth exploring different attendee engagement tools here and allowing those attendees to talk with each other. So Pathable, Hoover, and Attendify. There was another one that I was recently approached by, a company called Turnout. I think it's getturnout.com, which is a really interesting tool. They all provide different types of attendee engagement. Actually, last week we had the CEO of Pathable was in the conversation in the chat, and I hadn't realized that. We had someone from Hoover join last week, I think, as well. So having these different these interactions with different companies, I'm really seeing how fastly they're innovating. And over the last month, Pathable, I think all three of these platforms have added those features of direct video integration, which were not available when we did the Virtual Island Summit last year as easily. And so all worth exploring, but these are three examples that I'm very familiar with, but there are many, many more on the market. And what they effectively do is create that networking experience. It's like having the equivalent of a Facebook group or something like that, but much more interactive. You can do polls, you can do other types of engagement features, ask people to submit. For example, I know in academia, often they want to have poster sessions, can be a bit more challenging to do online. So asking people to submit posters and things like that through an app can be a really good way, and then having people comment on each other. So did you know that you could segment attendees into smaller breakout rooms? Okay, yes, no, you can see a mixture of people. The reason I think breakout groups are really interesting is that if you're having that meeting and you want to separate the conversations, as opposed to separating preparing a different meeting or having people, it just makes these things more streamlined. A lot of the times it takes a long time to be able to have people jump in and out of conversations or interact with each other. So the breakout rooms is a feature that Zoom has that I think is a really good feature. As I say, we can't do it in this format because we're using the webinar format, but the meeting format is a different thing, and you can do that through those to facilitate those group discussions and make sure people are able to connect directly with others in their sector of interest. Okay, so I've explained the software platforms, the networking experience. The third question, which I get all the time, was engagement. When people are there sitting at home, like presumably you all are today, how do you keep them engaged, and how do you make sure that they show up? That might seem a simple thing, but if someone has bought a ticket and has traveled somewhere, the likelihood is they're going to show up to your session. Now, when they're at home, they might be planning on attending, but with all the other distractions or the sudden job emergency that comes up or the neighbor knocks on the door or who knows what happens, you've got to kind of put that extra effort in to keep them reminded and make sure that they stay engaged. And that's both speakers and audience. A lot of people think that engagement is really difficult to create online. Not true. The truth is that you can actually get more deeper engagement, and using tools like the polls that we've already used, like the apps, like the Q&A box, which we'll come on to at the end, you can create that really interactive experience. Now, this is mostly me talking at you, but when I go through the Q&As, I'm actually able to answer your specific questions and go through those. That is a reason to show up live. there's lots of content on YouTube. So if people want to watch videos on a certain topic, they can go on YouTube and surely find that. But the benefit of having that live engagement, I think, is really key for virtual events. And that's why, with some exceptions, I normally encourage people to do sessions live as opposed to pre-recording. I'm keeping a little eye on the chat just for some of the comments coming through. So, but sorry if I missed them. These days you have several virtual meeting inventions at the same time. Very true. In Zoom, it does take time, and I agree with you, Olia. With more than 20 people, it can be difficult to have a meeting. So that's why these depending on the size of your group and the engagement that you want, it's important to put some thought into which tool makes sense for you. Okay, next slide. So reasons to use these apps and to create this engagement: attendees can directly talk to the speaker and get real-time responses, have that live engagement that you would have at an in-person event. I think it's also important to remember that often virtual events can be even more interactive than if you're sitting in a big lecture hall looking up at a speaker at the front. There's not very much opportunity to contribute, but I can see even while I'm talking, people are offering their own opinions in the chat. And when we had an even bigger group last week with 500 people, that chat had a lot of information in it. So people can offer their own thoughts. You know, everyone has experience and information to offer. And I think actually having the virtual summit can create a more level playing field for everyone to share information. Often if you're having a talk on a very specialized topic, the audience has just as much knowledge or just as much to contribute as the panel does. And so allowing the audience to share links, to post information about what they're doing, add their own comments in real time is really valuable. It's a bit more different when it's just me presenting because I'm not having as much time to read the chat live as things are going through. But when I've been on a panel discussion, while the other panelist is talking, I can then have a quick look through the chat and quickly respond to any points that were made, add some links in if someone says, oh, can I get some more information? So I think that engagement, if done right, can be even better than in-person events. And obviously you can better organize things like the Q&As. We've all been at those sessions where someone stands up to ask a question and then spends 10 minutes going on and on about something that is not that interesting to the rest of the audience. So by being able to do a Q&A session and organize that and make sure you don't repeat questions and things like that, it can be much more efficient and a much easier way of targeting that. And as a reminder, if you do have extra questions, just drop them in the Q&A box. I can see there's 10 questions in there already, and I'll come through. Julie made a good point though. It can be distracting though, chatting when the speaker is speaking. That's true, and I think you have to find a balance, right? Like I'm going back in to check the chat and have a look, but then I'm closing it because otherwise, with all these messages popping up while I'm talking, it's difficult to concentrate. I think often, I think now we're used to kind of multitasking a little bit more with online events. So there are pros and cons, but I think it's good to be able to have the additions of the chat and be able to share information. That's why having a team to respond to chats and emails is really helpful. Although it says that message, or for some reason it's popping up with my name, but actually that's one of my team members, Taylor, who's on the call and popping in some messages in the chat. So normally for these type of things, I would have a team that are helping respond to those messages in the chat. Hillary, I can see that question in there. Feel free to drop it into the Q&A and I'll come to it at the end. Okay. How are we doing for time? We're 40 minutes in, so lots of time. So some of the engagement tools, we've used some of them today: the chat, the polls, live stream to engage people on Facebook and other platforms, and the Q&A tools. They're all the easy tools that you can use within Zoom in addition to the breakout rooms as well. Just do a quick poll out of those tools, which of those you particularly like using. I think polls create a really nice way of breaking up a talk. Not only does it help the audience. Maybe I'm biasing the results now because I can see as soon as I said that, everyone chose polls. But not only does it help the audience get an idea of who else is in here, it helps the speaker understand. I mean, even simple things like what region are you from, that's useful information for me when I'm doing a talk to get an understanding, particularly if we're talking about something where that question is very relevant. I often ask what sector, didn't in this talk, but often ask which sector are you from? So if you're from university, academia, private sector, government, that's a useful tool for knowing who is in the audience. So just to share that, you can see actually polls were the top choice there, but maybe I biased the results by giving my own opinion. Yeah, so I think that using polls is a really nice way to break up a conversation. And what I was going to say is actually getting that information. So if I have 200 people and I can see, 60% of those are from Europe, I wasn't expecting that. So that's helpful information maybe when I'm planning future talks, when I'm thinking about time zones, when I'm thinking about how to do my messaging, where people are joining from, who they are. That kind of information is useful information for me as an event organizer, as well as a way of engaging the audience as well. I was going to say, did I have another poll here? No. Done the polls. So we've covered a lot of different points today. I'm about to tell you a bit of information about the course, and then I'll go in the Q&A. But in terms of what we've learned today, the software tools to use, I know I didn't give you an answer. People always want me to say, you should use this tool, but I can't because it depends on what platform you're using. It depends on what you need in terms of the numbers, in terms of what features you need, in terms of what your budget is. So I can't just say, you should use this tool. And as I say, there's more than one platform that you should use when you're thinking about getting registrations and all these other things as well. We talked a bit about the networking experience, the different apps that are available, and the pros and cons of using them, and then how to facilitate speaker and audience engagement. So these are, I mean, there's lots of other considerations. These were the 3 most common questions that I was getting, and I think 3 good basics to start with when you're thinking about doing a talk. In the course, we'll go through much more detail and add some extra things on as well. But I hope that was a useful coverage today. Just let me know in the chat which of the tips was most helpful for you. If there's anything specific, I'll do, here's the final poll. Out of those 3 things that I covered, so tip 1 was the platforms, tip 2 was networking, and tip 3 was engagement. But if there's anything specific that you learned today, we'll be interested to drop it in the chat. Some people asked not that they weren't seeing the polls. Hopefully you should see it now, and most people are answering it. If you're not seeing it, it might be because it's open in a different window, or maybe you clicked off it. But if you click it, it should pop up automatically when I launch a poll, and I can see 44% of people have voted. So hopefully the rest of you can see that. Someone asked if you can make polls where we can choose more than one. Absolutely. So these polls that we've done today have been a single choice option, but there's also an option where you can multiple choice as well. And Zoom has some good poll feature. I think there are other platforms, if polls are really important to you, that have even more detailed features. And also you can do those polls within the attendee platforms as well. A couple of people said you can't see the polls. Sorry about that. Over half of people can see the poll, so it might be that you have clicked off it, or that it's open in the screen. I would try and minimize it and see if the pop-up is appearing somewhere else, maybe behind the scenes. But most of you have been able to see these polls. 2 quick questions that have just come up from this. Someone asked, why would you use MailChimp? It's really important to share information and share emails. So for example, in today's session, you probably got several emails from me telling you when the event is. Some people said, well, you're sending too many emails, but the reality is you need to send an email and a reminder, several reminders for people to show up. If you look at the statistics, you just send 1 reminder 24 hours before, most people forget and don't show up. So it's really important to send those reminders to make sure people actually show up. And we've tried doing it before. We only send one email 24 hours before, and our rate of showing up was way small. So there is method to those, and having those people show, and otherwise we wouldn't have as many people show up as we have today. There was another question I was going to quickly answer. If I didn't answer the question, just pop it in the Q&A and I'll come to that at the end. Patricia said you like the countdown to the meeting. Yeah, it's helpful having those kind of countdown tools as well to remind people, because again, there's a lot of these events happening right now, and people really just forget. Ruth says, and some people don't like it, I get it, but Ruth says, I'm easily distracted and get pulled away, so the email reminders are helpful. And obviously we're doing the session for free, so we want to make sure that people actually get the benefit of that. Okay, so you're probably thinking now, what's next? I know we've kind of answered these questions, and if I have more time, we could probably spend a whole week on each of those questions, because there's a lot of areas to go to do research in. For the Virtual Island Summit, we spent months and months researching all these factors, making sure that we had everything prepared and all of the information to pull together a really good summit. We spent a lot of time doing that. So I'll try and answer as many questions as possible in the Q&A afterwards, but I'll definitely answer all of them in the course we're doing. For those of you who are joining, actually we've already 16 of the 20 places in the course have already gone. So there's a few places left, but we had a lot of people applying last week. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how to create a successful virtual event. So the idea of this course is an 8-week course for all the questions and information that we weren't able to go into in this session. It's starting this coming Monday, and the idea is to give you kind of all the tools that you need if you're organizing an event, and kind of walk you through that process. But also, if you don't have a specific event, it will be general skills that you'll be able to use in the future when thinking about how to incorporate virtual events into your program or business. So in terms of what you get in the course, as I said, it's an 8-week course. Every week we'll have a small group call with no more than 10 people with me, and so that will be much more interactive. Everyone will be within that small group. It will be like a meeting. So they'll be on video, we'll be able to share their experiences, and it will be other people organizing events. So we'll talk through specific problems that you're having, go into some more detail about those, and each week there'll be a different topic that we'll go through. But I'll answer all of those questions live, and I think there's a lot of value in that one-on-one time that obviously I'm not able to give with all the questions that are coming in now. I'll walk you through all the best practices that I've had from the last 6 years of working virtually, of having a virtual team, but also running specific virtual events, and give you the feedback on those. Every Monday, we'll share a video lesson on one of these topics. So firstly, next week, there's an introductory session that'll be making sure that you have a key understanding of the things we went into today, and thinking about how to apply those to your event. But every week, we'll go through the software platforms, the marketing and the registration tools, revenue and sponsorship models, how to create a financially viable event, the team and the skills needed to put together an event, speaker preparation, attendee engagement, the different event types and formats for sessions as well, and the tech setup, hardware and software. So those are each of the topics we'll cover, and I'll come to the Q&A afterwards. If there's any questions about the course, feel free to drop them in there as well, and I'll answer those now. So whether you're hosting a webinar series or a huge event, you use very similar skills. So we'll give you all the skills for group meetings, webinars, big events, and kind of everything in between, because they're similar, but obviously there are differences depending on the direction you're going in, and we want to make sure that you're able to use that full suite of information. We also will include in the course a revenue guide. Obviously, that's key. Do you charge people to show up to a virtual event? Do you have sponsorships? How do you partner with the media or other organizations? Those are some really key considerations I don't really have time to get into in this webinar, but we'll cover in the course. And virtual events are not necessarily free events. People often say, oh, well, for the Virtual Island Summit, it must have been very cheap to run. It wasn't. We spent thousands of dollars on the platforms, even more on the team and the time that was, including my time as well, which was a lot of time, a lot of sleepless nights working up to that. So virtual events can be expensive to run. It depends on how much detail you want to go. There are also cheap ways of doing it as well, but those do not necessarily have the same features and interaction that we discussed earlier. We'll also include in the course a speaker's guide. It's really important that your speakers, and even more so your chairs and moderators, are trained to maximize the use of all the tools. If you're an event organizer and your speakers don't necessarily know how to use all those tools, then you're going to kind of lose some of those functionalities. So we'll include that. And yeah, it's really important that speakers and participants know what they're doing so they can fully interact, and it's as simple as possible for them. Really important that you have a seamless technical setup, both the software and the hardware with the platforms. And so we'll make sure there's, again, a detailed guide that goes into all of that information. The number one reason why I found virtual events aren't successful is because it's too complicated for people to log in. You can do the most amazing events with all of the features that we've discussed here, but then even today, I had several people email me with difficulties with the link right before the call. We tried to make it as smooth as possible. And again, that's why we sent multiple reminders. So you have the link and it's easy to find. But people always, for whatever reason, maybe they're not familiar with the technology, or they get confused by the platform. You need to minimize those things as possible, because often people will give up pretty quickly if they can't get in. So it's really important to make a seamless flow. And that's as much about communication as it is about the technical aspect. Okay, a few more things in the course. We'll have a community of other event organizers who you can share information from. And I think that's really important to not only learn from me and from Island Innovations team, but also from the other people in the event, in the course, and share their experiences and learnings as well. And that community will be available long after the course is finished. And of course, all the information in the course will be available for you afterwards as well. Having that community means you can not only draw on our resources, but you can draw on the expertise and resources of all of those participating. So I've already told you a bit about the Virtual Island Summit. Obviously, that was a big takeaway for us in terms of experiences. We use sponsorships for our revenue model, so it's free to attend. And the main cost for us was the technology and the team. And we did that in 4 months. That was a lot. That was a long 4 months, and we put a lot of work in during those 4 months. I could have really done with twice as much time, because there were so many unexpected things during that time, so that we had to research. So the idea is that we're saving you all of that time, research and preparation that we put into the Virtual Island Summit in this course, as well as all of our other experiences running webinars, running courses, running events, etc. And hopefully save you the time. So it should be worth it. So people, we got some really good feedback about the summit in terms of the organization. People were really happy with how well organized it was and how much they were able to learn, and the quality of the speakers. People were impressed with the concept. We really invented this new concept, or I wouldn't say we invented a concept, sorry, we invented the structure. So we put together a custom technology structure that we were able to bring in the Virtual Island Summit, and that was tailor-made for the needs that we had and we knew our audience had. And that was also why the technology was enabled us to do, get the level of interaction we did. And we had a lot of people ask us to do it more often. I would love to do it every 3 to 6 months, but I don't have the energy. And I think doing it once a year is valuable, but we obviously do other events in the meantime as well. And I think also that accessibility that I've really been pushing for me, beyond the COVID crisis, the accessibility and sustainability aspects of virtual events create so much value, and they will long into the future. So we can really use these tools beyond this year, when hopefully things get back to normal, to still incorporate virtual principles into our events, because I think now people's mindsets are changing, and people in the future, even when things are back to normal, will be a lot more accustomed to doing this. So virtual events, in my opinion, are the future. There's the versatility, the economic aspects. They are cheaper. You don't have the venue costs. They're more accessible, and they're more sustainable. So for all of these regions, virtual events are not just something for this summer while people are stuck at home. They're going to be more into the future, and the technology, as I said, is evolving so quickly. They're going to get better and better and better, and that's going to reduce the demand for physical events going into the future. So now's the time, if you're thinking and you want all the tools, you can launch the event in 2 months, regardless of whether you're in the private sector, government, academia, NGOs. All of these will have useful information coming from this course. If you want to move your existing conference online, if you want to create a new event, or think about in the future doing a hybrid event that's both online and offline. So included in the course, we think there's at least $4,000 of value with all those things that I've mentioned. The total cost is $1,297, that's US dollars. We are giving everyone who's attending the webinar a $300 discount that will last until Friday. We're doing the second webinar series because of the demand from last week, so we extended that deadline until Friday for the discount. If you would like to use that, the code is Friday-300. You should see in the chat a link to the information. Let me just type it. Taylor, if you're there, could you just add the link to the course? There you go. It's in the chat now. So if you click on that link and use the code Friday-300, you should see this discount come through straight away. And don't worry, I'm going to get onto the questions in just a second after I've given this information. So the enrollment closes on Sunday. The course officially starts on Monday. But as I said, we only have 20 places on the course, and we I think have four of those left right now. So would encourage you to go ahead if you're thinking of doing the course and use the discount and make sure you register ASAP. Okay, time for the Q&A. I know there was a lot of information there. I hope that was all useful. I can see a ton of questions coming through, and I know some of those have been responded to in writing as well. Let me just see the chat box quickly. Sorry for those of you that have to jump off. Thanks, Erica. Cleo, thanks everyone for joining and for the nice compliments. Someone asked if we can compress the course. There's a lot of information in the course, and the videos will be available. But we can do a custom workshop or consultation with you, but we're not able to compress that exact course content. But if you want to shoot me a message, Yvette, we can have a chat about potentially helping you with a specific event. Oh, hi Annie, hi Cleo, hi Olivia, thanks for all of that. Carla asks, are you able to provide any guidance on how to monetize a Zoom webinar? That will obviously be covered in detail in the course. Very briefly, to give you some thoughts, you can obviously charge for attendees. One of the challenges there is that there's so much free content, it's difficult to get people to pay unless they're very committed. It's not impossible. Again, it depends on your audience, but getting people to pay for a virtual event is often more challenging because mentally people still don't value the same as they do for the personal events. And with all the free content there already, it's challenging. So sponsorship is one way of doing that. Also providing an upgrade, for example, thinking about other things you can offer, but we'll definitely cover that in a lot of detail in the course. Okay, Benjamin said, how to virtually facilitate program elements that have been typically thought to require face-to-face or non-verbal communication. Good reply from Janet there saying Miro and Zoom. Oh, the Unleashed session. I didn't join that last Saturday, but I heard really great things. Benjamin says, looking for workarounds of how communication is nonverbal. Certain types of interaction rely heavily on that nonverbal communication. Really, really good point there. Obviously, I recommend having videos because you can see my facial expressions, you can somewhat see my hand gestures, and that definitely is helpful in addition to the slides. So there are some webinar platforms that don't allow videos. They just encourage you to share the presentation. But I really like the extra value provided of having that video thing. So I think that's part of it. I hope that answers your question there, Benjamin, but the video is an important part for me. Desiree says, any thoughts, concerns, advantages on data privacy and security in Zoom? This is a great question. Zoom has been criticized a lot recently for security issues. There was a problem last summer 2019, of people hacking in through Zoom. Zoom have worked really hard to improve their security. I would say there is some level of risk of using any online platform for that security issue, just as there is a security risk in an in-person conference, and you have to mitigate for that. Some of you if you're in the UK, you might have seen the Prime Minister got in trouble because he used Zoom for his cabinet meeting, and he actually tweeted out a picture that included his Zoom webinar ID, so people could potentially log into a cabinet meeting online. So there are clearly things there are good practices that you have to do that mitigate for those. Some of them are just on the organizer's side, making sure that you're not sharing any confidential information. But also for Zoom, I think actually they've been overly criticized. I think all platforms have this issue, but because Zoom has now come so big, they've got a lot of attention around this. But I don't think the security issues in Zoom are particularly bad. And actually, I can send it you if you send me an email. Zoom have recently published a white paper that covers some of these questions in detail and how they as a company are working to mitigate them. So the security issues are definitely important, but I don't think Zoom is the only one that has any security issues. Felix Dodds, hi Felix. I think you're at UNC. I'm a former UNC student. Which is the best platform that allows whiteboard for brainstorming? You could do that by sharing your screen on Zoom. So I was sharing a PowerPoint, but you can just share your screen in general and use a white background to draw. Ruth says Mural is good. Oh, where did that go? Yeah, someone said Mural is another good platform. That's not one I've used, but there are others around there. But simply sharing your screen and then having a whiteboard, you can do some really good tools. Apologies for those of you, we've gone a little bit over time. Apologies for those of you that have to leave. No worries if you do have to leave. We'll send out this recording to you as well. But for those of you who want to stay, I can see there are still 135 of you in the call. I'll go through a few more of these questions, but no worries if you have to leave. Thanks so much for joining and for the kind words you're putting in the chat. Someone in the chat also asked, what is your experience of hybrid events combining both the virtual and physical components? Obviously, that's not going to be happening. I'm presuming that's not an event in the next couple of months, but in the future, that's a really important part. The disadvantage of doing a hybrid event is you have all the costs of an online event and all the costs of an in-person event. So it can actually end up being, and not just cost, but time and effort. So you're really doing both of those things. There are roles of doing that. The easiest way, which I wouldn't really call a virtual event, but the easiest thing you can do is just screen or live stream, say, a panel discussion onto Facebook or YouTube so people can watch it. That doesn't really create an interactive experience. I think the challenge with doing a hybrid event is creating an interactive experience where both the online participants feel like they can interact and the in-person people and the physical people, for want of a better word, feel like they can interact as well. That is your challenge there with creating that. Again, not impossible, but be aware that you're creating a lot of work for yourself by doing it hybrid. So carefully consider that if that's a route that you want to go down. Okay, next questions. Any resources in Zoom for low internet bandwidth? So again, this is a feature that a lot of the competitors don't offer. So another reason Zoom is a good tool, you can actually call in over a number and present over the phone in case you have low bandwidth or bandwidth issues. So I think that is a good feature, and that's why I mentioned the Ireland case study from Tristan da Cunha, where they have a low internet bandwidth, but we're able to call in as well. So thanks, Yvette. Yeah, feel free to send me an email if there's any follow-up here that you want to do. Julie said, do you know or recommend virtualsummits.com? I don't know that platform in detail, and I haven't used it, so I'd have to do some more research there to know whether I can recommend it, but it's not one that I've used. As I say, there are so many platforms out there. I can't have tested everyone, but I try and be familiar with as many as possible to know the pros and cons. Amber said, how do you do speed networking in the best way? Which tools? Does that depend on the amount of people? Yeah, it definitely does. So if you have a small kind of meeting that's 20 people, you're going to think about it in a different way than if you have a conference with 4,000 people. So there are different approaches to that. One example, if you use Slack, Slack is a really good platform for sharing information. That's what we use for our internal team, and they have a tool called Donut, which allows for speed networking and automatically pairs you with someone from your same Slack channel to have a conversation with. So there are tools like that you can use, and there are speed networking tools that you can use within those apps I mentioned before. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Julie. Glad you could join us. Seeing these chat messages coming through. Sorry, I can't mention everyone. Inga says, is there a technology that might look as if an armchair discussion and a virtual presentation? Okay, so I think like if something like this that we're doing now, I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Inga. If you want to describe that a little bit, because I mean this technology that we're using now, would you class this as a technology that will be useful for you? Drop another message in there so I know a bit more detail. Okay, Jen says, I'm an event director for a brewery and was hoping to hear from other event planners on how they're adjusting and how they host events now virtually. Oh, that's a good one. How do you create a brewery beer event? I mean, the food and drinks industry, that's a little bit more challenging, right? When obviously a big part of that is sharing the product. Be interested to have a chat with you about that, Jen, because there could be some creative ways of doing that if you were even mailing your product to people or something like that. I have to have a think about it. But when you obviously have something like beer, that's difficult to provide for a virtual platform. So good point. In a virtual conference, how many sessions would you hold a day? So Tisha replied to that saying virtual sessions be around 25 minutes. I disagree. I think an hour is a good time for a virtual session, but sometimes it can go up for 2 hours. It really depends on your audience, how engaged they are, what they're looking to get. If you're thinking of 90-minute sessions, I would not expect your audience to sit in front of a computer for a whole day. I think because you don't have that captive audience, it's kind of unrealistic to assume they would. That's why the Virtual Island Summit, we spread our sessions out over a whole week, had them at all different time zones, and people could just pick and choose the ones that were relevant to them. There was no expectation of people joining every session. I think the majority of your participants, even if they're committed, are not going to sit in front of the computer for a whole day attending these sessions. So if you were doing, say, 5 sessions in one day, that's fine. But you should assume that not everyone is going to be joining every session. People will probably pick 2 or 3 of those at most to attend. The other option is spreading them out over a longer period of time and having them in more detail. Okay, a lot of questions here. I'm trying to get as many as possible, and we've got about 5 more minutes to go through them. Oh, Aisha. Hi, Aisha. Nice to see you. Hope you're well in Jamaica. You said, do you prefer using the pre-recorded video for a plenary that you want everyone to see? It depends on the summit. It depends on the session. Pre-recorded, if, for example, you have a high-level speaker that's difficult to crack down, the pre-recorded video can be helpful, but then you do lose that interaction. If it's something that you're not expecting Q&A, or you don't really need the interaction, then potentially you could do it pre-recorded. But there are disadvantages, and I think the main thing to think about is why would people show up to watch a pre-recorded video when they have YouTube? So you've got to give them a reason to show up live. I think that's really important. How do you digitize the agenda, hyperlinking simultaneous sessions so attendees can easily navigate? That's a challenge, yeah. That's a really good question, actually, Aisha. You want to make sure the agenda is really accessible. There are tons of tools you can do that, but it's really important that every session is easily linked, because otherwise it's very easy to get lost in links, sessions, all these different things. So there are apps that can do that. We built a platform for ourselves to host that on the website. And then the third question, do you train presenters, attendees on the different platforms? We had a pre-meeting for every single session, and normally we will have a pre-meeting for training. Generally presenters, especially if they've done it before, there's not as much training, but for chairs and for moderators, really, really important that you give them training so they can use all of these different tools. And I think even for participants, sometimes depending on what tools you're using, having a quick training session for them can be super helpful for those that might be more uncomfortable. Because the thing is, it just depends on the person. Like, I'm using these software every single day, so for me, like, I know a lot of other people, it's really easy to do that. But for some people, especially now that they've kind of been forced into using these newly, it can take a bit of an adjustment. So that things that might seem simple to you are not always as simple to other people. A quick question from Helen: can you live stream a Zoom webinar on LinkedIn? No, you can live stream directly to YouTube or to Facebook. LinkedIn, actually, for live streaming, you have to apply to that. They don't let everyone live stream, and you have to do it directly in LinkedIn. So not everyone can live stream. You actually have to have a special permission there. Okay, I'll try and do a couple more questions before we finish. What are your tips for hosting sessions for students, like having a guest lecturer? I think, I'm presuming you're meaning university students. So, for example, I've done guest lectures before. I did a guest lecture at the University of Aruba last year, and that was virtually, and actually all the students there were in the same place at the same time, and I was virtually streamed in. That's different than now, when all of the students would be at home joining in from home. And I know a lot of teachers are struggling with, particularly high school students are struggling to figure out how they make sure the kids are staying engaged when they're at home. I think a lot of the same principles would apply for students. You can definitely do a guest lecture like this. You can definitely make that interactive. You can make it, I saw someone else ask about involving kids. And there are probably some tweaks that you'd have to make to the platform, but it would, again, depend on how the number, if they're in the same place, what kind of features you would want to use there. Okay, Olivia says we're looking to recreate a panel session, pre-recording the presentations, and then have them log in to answer the Q&As. What are the pros and cons of that, looking at GoToWebinar? Yeah, that's definitely something we'll cover in the course in a lot of detail, all of those different sessions. I don't know why you necessarily need GoToWebinar if you're pre-recording the session. Maybe I missed something there. But I would also consider thinking about having it live. There's obviously a trade-off there, but having a live session is really helpful. And it might be easier to just use a separate platform to answer the Q&As. Even things like Google Forms, which are quite simple, can be good to do if you have questions that you want attendees to answer. But if you want to make it public, then you might have to have a more complex app to do that. Oh, Olivia says you're already in the course. Fantastic. And we'll definitely get into some more detail on this next week. Judith asked about time differences during virtual events. You have to be realistic. We did 2 sessions today because for our friends in Australia, the Pacific, and Asia, it's the middle of the night there, and they're probably, as much as they love virtual events, they probably prefer their sleep. So you have to be realistic if you're having a very global event of when people are able to join in. And that's the benefit of also having everything recorded, available online, so people all over the world can then access those videos afterwards if the time zone didn't suit or they had a conflict. But I would think about who your audience is. Look at the list of people. If most people are joining from Europe or the United States, then you're going to have different time zones. If everyone's joining from Japan and China, then you'd have to think of different time zones. So it would just depend on where your audience is. If it's completely spread out, then just having a diversity of sessions where people can join those that they are able to would be the best bet, because you want to make sure that people can find one. Helen asked, is there a coupon code? Yes, let me just type that in, Friday-300. So yeah, that, I think, oh no, I didn't send that. So it's Friday-300 if you want to use the coupon code for the course. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. We've gone 15 minutes over. Appreciate some of you have stayed on for questions, and I'm sorry I couldn't answer all of the questions. I know there's a lot more, but we will definitely look at how to answer all of those in the course. If you're looking for help on specific events, feel free to email me. We'll be in touch.